In January, Zimbabwe's government authorized a 230,000-ton emergency grain purchase from Zambia. The northern neighbour has been Zimbabwe's main source of supplementary grain imports that have been used to shore up poor maize outputs in recent years. This time round, Zambia is also facing a poor season due to the El Nino phenomenon. Output of maize is expected to drop by a third, and it will need at least 100,000 metric tons of its own imports.
This has disadvantaged our members to the tune of 80,000 tons, which is around $27 million. This is the maize that we had prepaid, and we are now in the midst of collecting.
The millers are now looking further afield.
We are currently working on 5 vessels that are docking at Beira in Maputo starting around 5-7 March. That will bring in yellow and white maize. The only biggest challenge we have, and we are working around it, is the issue to do with the logistics. Our ports have not been configured to handle the amount of maize that we want to bring in.
But that's not the only problem. Zimbabwe's government insists on non-GMO food imports. Humanitarian agencies hope its stance can be softened given the severity of the crisis.
We are in discussions with the government because there is a need for larger scale imports of food commodities, including potentially also commodities that are not regularly consumed by the most vulnerable people we talk about in the south. So we are looking at bringing in rice potentially as well and other commodities. But we are in dialogue with the government, and I think we're on a good way in finding a way of making sure what is needed can come into the country.
The Millers Association says it's been bringing in small quantities of genetically modified grain and milling it under government supervision. It says it may continue to do so because there's no other alternative. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, South Africa too has been forced to import maize in order to plug a shortfall as the worst drought in the country's history continues to savage the region. Moody's has also said that the situation risks tipping an already weak South African economy right into a recession as rising agricultural imports feed into rising inflation. Let's get the latest on this particular development. Sumitra Naidu joins us now live from Johannesburg. Sumitra, let's start with Zimbabwe's case. Maize prices over there, at least on the retail front, have already soared by over 50%. How much worse can it get?
Well, Rama, maize prices in Malawi are up over 70% already as these drought conditions persist. It's quite dire. 50 million people across southern Africa are being affected, and many are warning that it will get worse before it gets better. The rainfall pattern is still too low, and in most of the SADC region, these drought conditions started last year already, so it's been a ripple effect, a massive backlog in farming, and maize remains a staple in most of these countries. Many are at risk of starvation. Maize production has fallen sharply, and with the inflated prices, it's become so much more expensive to import the grains.
Indeed, given the fact that most of the other countries in the region, like Malawi, for example, is having its first serious grain deficit in at least a decade. Are these countries now reconsidering perhaps the use of genetically modified maize?
It looks like they are. I spoke to a few farmers, and it's still a very controversial issue. Countries don't want genetically modified food, but because of the situation, some countries are actually taking it. But there's little transparency when they actually take it. In South Africa, farmers are now planting drought-resistant seeds, which is in effect genetically modified. So that crop will be GM completely. Aid agencies are also flying in tons of maize to help poorer countries. Most of this is said to be GM maize. Governments may be forced to come out and endorse this GM products if the situation persists.
Indeed. We'll leave you there for the time being, but Sumitra will be joining us a little later on.